another nostalgia biased merchant who wasn't as good as the memory suggests, or a truly world class talent who was banned during his prime years? Just how good was Stephen Lee? As a break builder, it would be really difficult to categorise Stephen Lee anywhere above mediocre by today's standards. Someone to compare him to would potentially be Alan McManus or Mark King when looking at the centuries per season statistics, who are both good players but would not be considered in the elite for break building. When zoning in on the break building further and looking at frames per 50 break statistics, Stephen Lee's record of 4.74 frames per 50 plus break, for someone who is frequently referred to as this attacking and naturally gifted flair player, it makes for confusing reading. For reference, a player seen as a disjointed break builder and negatively minded in Peter Ebdon made a 50 plus break every 3.8 frames, which is significantly better than Stephen Lee. In fact, I compared several players who were considered top 16 level between 2000 and 2010. Alan McManus, Matthew Stevens, Ken Doherty, Joe Perry, Steve Davis, Marco Fu, John Parrott and Steve Maguire all possess superior break building stats per frames played. It actually took me a while to find a current snooker player who performs similarly to Stephen Lee in this area and to make a comparison. Michael Holt, Mark Davis and Daniel Wells were the three I found, who are currently ranked 66th, 59th and 46th in the world rankings. My general assessment of Stephen Lee when using the eye test is that although his general play was fluid and his cue action easy on the eye, his game was inconsistent, his cue ball control wasn't very precise and his methods of travel around the table were not that of an elite player. Hey guys, I'm going to be continuing with these analysis videos and ranking some of the best players in the world. If you like this kind of content, smash the like button, subscribe if you're new, and comment down below who you would like to see me analyse next. The person with the highest upvoted comment will be the player who I feature very soon. Cheers guys. Long potting stats are much more difficult to find than the raw break building stats, but I feel as if the eye test for long potting is usually quite reliable. There's no two ways about it, Stephen Lee was a superb long potter with a great amount of cue power. It's often said that Judd Trump plays shots that no one else can really play, and that is usually referring to the amount of spin generated by Judd. Well, I'll tell you what, Stephen Lee could play most of those shots. His long potting, like Trump's, was certainly eye-catching and therefore memorable, but was it consistent? Well, from watching a lot of his footage back to make this video, I'd say yes, it was. I wouldn't quite place him in the category of Neil Robertson, Sean Murphy and Mark Williams who are elite, but he would definitely be in the category below alongside the likes of Judd Trump, Kyron Wilson and Ronnie, who are very reliable over distance over the course of a season. When looking at Stephen Lee's profile as a player, long potting and cue power are definitely what made him one of the top players in the world for a while. Safety play, again, is difficult to analyse when we aren't watching a player week in, week out. However, Stephen Lee, from what I can tell, was a good safety player. I don't think you'll see him in any compilations alongside Mark Selby or John Higgins, but he definitely had strong levels of snooker IQ. I mean, you don't spend 11 consecutive seasons in the world's top 16 players in any era without being somewhat tactically astute. Stephen Lee was definitely a more attacking player than a defensive one, and I think his main strength was trying to open the balls up as quickly as possible, even if he didn't possess those elite break building skills we discussed earlier. My overall assessment is that Stephen Lee was a competent tactician, but his focus was more on knocking in long ones and trying to score, which means he did not potentially focus on this area as much as he could have. Answering the question of whether Stephen Lee had a good temperament or not is actually quite hard to do. On the one hand, his temperament was praised throughout his run to the 2008 Masters final, where he got through 6-5 against Graham Dott, beat Peter Ebdon 6-1 in a match where neither played well, but Lee showed his mental toughness, and then in beating Marco Fu 6-2 in the semi-finals, he reached his first and only Triple Crown final. This was a tournament where Lee's temperament was praised, but there have been many instances throughout his career I can recall where his temperament let him down, such as the 2003 World Championship semi-final, where Lee lost 2 sessions 7-1 to Mark Williams due to a comedy of errors. Another instance was the 2012 World Open final, where Stephen Lee had played well all week only to hardly pot a ball throughout the final, punching the table multiple times and losing 10-1 to Mark Allen. Stephen Lee then seemed to be a bit of a mixed bag. Not the worst temperament wise, but definitely not the best. Unlike the very elite players such as Stephen Hendry and Judd Trump, it's hard to summarise head-to-heads. I could easily look at Stephen Lee's record against Hendry, O'Sullivan, Higgins, Williams, Selby and Robertson, but that would be unfair as I always compare players to their direct peers. In this case, I'm going to look at 6 players who were always consistently near Stephen Lee in the world rankings between 2000 and when he was banned in 2014. Stephen Lee 4, Matthew Stevens 9, Stephen Lee 2, Alan McManus 3, Stephen Lee 5, Peter Ebdon 8, Stephen Lee 10, Graham Dott 3, Stephen Lee 7, Marco Fu 4, Stephen Lee 4, Stephen Maguire 5. Stephen Lee then doesn't perform amazingly against players of a similar level to him. I feel like there is a trend of Lee playing well early on in tournaments, but in big games or big matches, not quite having the temperament or overall quality to get the job done. We must comment that he won 5 ranking titles, which is respectable, and he did beat Sean Murphy 9-4 in the final of the 2006 Welsh Open, who was the current world champion at the time. Overall, Stephen Lee is a difficult player to assess. The mind focuses on those amazing flare shots, long pots and deep screws, and you automatically think maverick, or what could he have achieved if he didn't get banned? But when you dissect his play, look at his records, I don't see a maverick or a potential serial winner. I see a very good top 16 player who, on his day, could beat anyone. He's more Stephen Maguire than Stephen Hendry. He's more Jack Lisowski than Judd Trump. So without further ado, here is my rating for Stephen Lee. Breakbuilding 6 out of 10 as discussed, not in the top level. Long potting 8.5 out of 10, I've given him the same that I gave Judd Trump. Safety play 7 out of 10, very solid. Temperament 6.5 out of 10, a mixed bag. And his head to head 6 out of 10. He didn't really do well in the big matches, giving him a total of 34 out of 50, which just sneaks him into the top 16 class. Now I get it, Stephen Lee was in the top 16 for 12 seasons of his career and was at one time world number 5, so surely he should be rated higher. Well, maybe, but you have to realise there will be more than 16 players who will be top 16 rated over the generations. I simply think Stephen Lee, although at one time a top player, would definitely be around 16th or lower in the world if he was around today. And to address my first point, do I think he was banned during his peak years? I'd argue not. I think Stephen Lee would still potentially be a pro today, but I don't see him as having the potential to be a top player throughout the past decade. What do you think though? Do you think Stephen Lee was better than this? Do you think Stephen Lee may have even been a top 4 player had he not been banned? Let me know in the comments, and don't forget to comment the player you want me to see make analysis of next.